Before we get started, please like and subscribe. Let me know where you're watching from, and you can support the channel by clicking thanks or joining. I moved into the apartment at the beginning of October. When the nights started arriving earlier than expected, the real estate agent described it as quiet and private, 2 words that sounded comforting at the time. The building stood on a narrow street where traffic rarely passed after dark. It felt tucked away from the rest of the city, like a place the world had forgotten on purpose. The apartment itself was small but clean. Fresh paint covered the walls in a dull off-white tone. The floors were old wood, sanded down enough to look smooth, but not enough to erase their age. Every step produced a faint creak, as if the building needed to announce your presence to itself. The bedroom was at the back of the apartment. One window faced another brick wall so close, it felt like the building was pressing its face against mine. Almost no sunlight came through. Even during the day, the air in the room felt heavier than the rest of the apartment, but I assumed that was just poor ventilation. I work nights editing audio, which means silence matters to me more than most people. I listen for flaws, for distortions, for things hidden under the surface. That bedroom felt quiet in a way I had never experienced before. Not peaceful quiet, expectant quiet. The first night passed without incident. I slept deeply, without dreams, and woke up feeling strangely rested. The second night was the same. By the third night, I had started to believe I had found the perfect place. That belief did not survive the fourth night. I woke up at exactly 3 in the morning without knowing why. There was no noise to wake me, no light change. My body simply decided it was time to be alert. My eyes remained closed, but my mind was fully awake. That was when I heard the breathing. At first, it was so subtle I thought it was my own. A slow inhale, a gentle exhale. Calm, controlled. The sound came from my right side, close enough that it felt intimate. I adjusted slightly in bed, testing my theory. The breathing did not change. I held my breath. The sound continued. That was the moment my stomach tightened. The breathing had a rhythm that did not belong to me. It was too steady, too deliberate. Whoever was breathing beside me sounded relaxed, almost content. I stayed perfectly still, afraid that even the smallest movement might invite something I was not ready to face. The darkness in the room felt thicker now, like it had weight. The mattress beneath me dipped slightly on the right side, as if something had settled into it carefully. I reached for my phone, my fingers shaking as they brushed against the screen. The glow illuminated the room just enough for me to see the empty space beside me. There was no one there, no body, no shadow, no shape. The breathing stopped the instant the light appeared. I did not sleep again that night. The next morning, I told myself it had been exhaustion, stress, my brain misfiring in the dark. Humans are excellent at inventing explanations when the alternative is unacceptable. I showered. I drank coffee. I went about my day pretending the night had never happened. The second night, I left a lamp on. At 3 in the morning, the breathing returned. This time, I was awake before it started. There was no confusion, no doubt. The sound emerged slowly, like it was aware of my attention. The mattress shifted again, slight pressure beside my leg. The breathing was closer now, louder. I noticed the pauses between each inhale and exhale were identical. 4 seconds in, 5 seconds out, over and over again. I began counting without realizing it. My own breathing refused to sync with it. My heart raced, completely out of rhythm. The thing beside me remained perfectly calm. I whispered a single word into the darkness. "Hello." The breathing did not stop. Instead, it adjusted. The next inhale was deeper, heavier, as if it were drawing air for emphasis. A response. My mouth went dry. Whatever was beside me could hear me. Worse, it chose to acknowledge me. I spent the rest of the night sitting upright against the wall with every light on, staring at the empty side of the bed. Nothing else happened. The room returned to silence, but the silence felt artificial, like something was holding its breath. On the 3rd day, I asked the building superintendent if anyone had lived in the apartment before me. He paused for just a moment too long. "People come and go," he said. His eyes never met mine. He asked if everything was working properly and ended the conversation before I could press further. That night, I decided I needed proof, something tangible. Sound does not lie. Audio records truth even when our senses fail us. At least, that is what I believed then. I placed my phone on the nightstand and set it to record. I lay down and stared at the ceiling, waiting. At 3 in the morning, the breathing began. I did not open my eyes. I listened carefully, memorizing every detail. The moisture in the breath, the way it lingered at the end of each exhale. It sounded close enough to feel warm, though no air touched my skin. Then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There were 2 sets of breathing. One was mine. The other was slightly delayed, following me but never matching me completely, as if it were studying my rhythm and choosing not to copy it. I stopped breathing. The other did not. Instead, it moved closer. The space beside my face felt heavier, denser. The breathing grew louder, so close I could feel a faint vibration near my ear. Then it exhaled directly against me. Long, slow, deliberate. Not a word, not a sound meant for communication, just breath. When morning came, I listened to the recording. There was only one voice on the file, mine. After that night, I stopped trusting sleep. It no longer felt like rest. It felt like surrender. Every evening, as the sky darkened outside the brick wall, my body reacted before my mind did. My shoulders tightened, my breathing shortened. The bedroom no longer looked like a place meant for recovery. It looked like a trap that reset itself every 24 hours. I told myself the recording proved nothing had happened. There was no second breath on the file, no sound of movement, no whisper, just me alone in the dark. That should have comforted me. Instead, it made everything worse. If the sound had not been captured, then whatever was beside me was not interested in being documented. That thought followed me all day. At work, I replayed the audio through professional headphones, boosting frequencies, isolating noise floors, searching for artifacts my ears might have missed. I found nothing. Clean silence between my breaths, perfect gaps where another presence should have been. Silence, I learned, can be curated. The second evening after the recording, I tried changing my routine. I stayed up later. I kept the television on low volume. I drank until my head felt heavy. When I finally lay down, the clock read 2:47. I watched the red numbers change, daring them to reach 3. 3 arrived anyway. The television volume dipped suddenly, as if someone had pressed mute. The room felt heavier, the air thick and resistant. I did not hear the breathing right away. Instead, I felt it. Pressure. The mattress beside me compressed slowly, deliberately, like weight being lowered with care. My heart began to pound so loudly I was certain it could be heard. I stared at the ceiling, unable to turn my head. Then the breathing began. It was closer than before, deeper. The sound vibrated through the mattress, up my spine, into my teeth. I realized with sick clarity that the thing beside me was no longer pretending to be human. The pauses between breaths were still precise, but the depth was wrong. Too much air, too much capacity. I counted again. 4 seconds in, 5 seconds out. Always the same. I reached for the lamp, but before my fingers touched it, the breathing changed. The inhale stretched longer. The exhale slowed, dragging out like a warning. Do not. That word never formed, but the message was unmistakable. I froze. The pressure on the mattress increased slightly, not enough to hurt, enough to remind me it could. I lay there until my eyes burned and my muscles cramped. When morning finally arrived, the breathing faded without sound, leaving behind a hollow quiet that rang in my ears. I called in sick that day. By afternoon, I convinced myself I needed help. Not police, not friends. Someone who understood sound the way I did. Someone who would believe me. I visited an old colleague named Marcus, a sound engineer who specialized in acoustic spaces, studios, theaters, old buildings with personality. When I described the apartment, his expression shifted from casual interest to focused concern. Some rooms amplify things that should not carry, he said. Others trap sound, let it echo longer than it should. I did not tell him about the breathing, not directly. I asked if a room could make a person hear something that was not there. He nodded slowly. But sometimes, he said, rooms do not create sound. They remember it. That night, I invited Marcus over. The bedroom looked smaller with another person inside it. Less empty, less threatening. He set up microphones around the room, small black shapes against the pale walls. He placed one on the nightstand, one beneath the bed, one near the door. If something happens, he said, we will catch it. For the first time in days, I felt something close to relief. We sat on opposite sides of the bed, lights on, talking quietly to pass the time. Midnight came and went. 2:30 passed without incident. At 2:59, every microphone spiked at once. Marcus looked up sharply. Did you hear that? He asked. I shook my head. I had not heard anything, but my skin prickled. Then the breathing started. Marcus stiffened. His eyes locked on the empty space beside me. That is not you, he whispered. The breathing was louder now, unrestrained. The mattress dipped deeply, as if a full body had settled there. Marcus reached for his equipment, hands trembling. The room felt wrong. Too small. The walls seemed closer. The breathing shifted. It began to mirror Marcus. His inhale shortened. The other followed. His exhale stuttered. The other echoed it imperfectly. "Stop breathing," I said. Marcus tried. The other did not. It leaned closer. The microphone screeched with feedback as something overloaded them. Marcus cried out, clutching his ears. The lights flickered once, then died. In the darkness, the breathing filled the room. Not two sets. One, deep, endless. When the lights came back, Marcus was gone. The microphones lay scattered across the floor, cords tangled, one crushed inward, as if squeezed by a hand that did not need fingers. The apartment was silent. I never saw Marcus again. The police asked questions. They searched the building. They suggested stress, breakdown, voluntary disappearance. They did not stay past sunset. That night, I slept alone again. At 3 in the morning, the breathing returned. This time, it came from my side of the bed, from inside my chest. After Marcus disappeared, the apartment stopped pretending to be normal. The silence changed shape. It no longer waited for night. It followed me through the day, clinging to the corners of the room like residue. Even with the windows open, the air felt recycled, as if every breath I took had already been used. I did not leave. That is the part people question the most. They ask why I stayed, as if fear automatically creates clarity. Fear can paralyze just as easily as it can warn. I told myself I needed answers. I told myself leaving would not make the breathing stop. Deep down, I suspected it would only follow me. The police returned once more to ask routine questions. They walked through the apartment quickly, eyes flicking toward the bedroom and then away again. One of them paused near the bed, frowning. "This room feels wrong," he said quietly. Neither of them stayed long. That night, I moved the bed away from the wall. I needed space. I needed proof that whatever had been beside me was tied to a location, not to me. I dragged the frame until it sat in the center of the room, surrounded by open floor on all sides. I slept with the lights on. At 3 in the morning, the breathing came from underneath me, not beside. Below, the sound traveled up through the mattress, vibrating through the springs and into my bones. It was louder than ever, unfiltered by distance. I felt it more than I heard it. My teeth buzzed, my chest tightened. I rolled onto my side and stared at the floor beneath the bed. The shadows pooled there unnaturally, thick and layered. The breathing did not rise or fall from a single point. It came from everywhere beneath me at once. I screamed. The sound was swallowed instantly. No echo, no return. The breathing deepened. Pleased, I fled the bed and pressed myself against the far wall, heart hammering. The breathing followed, no longer confined to the mattress. It filled the room, expanding outward like fog. I realized then that the room itself was breathing. The walls flexed subtly with each inhale. The air pressure shifted in waves. The space expanded and contracted, slow and deliberate. The apartment was no longer a container. It was a lung. I spent the rest of the night night sitting on the floor, counting breaths that were not mine. In the morning, I searched the building records, deeds, renovation permits, anything that might explain the room. I found a name buried in an old inspection report. Elias Crow. The report mentioned a tenant who had sealed off the bedroom for sound treatment decades earlier. Thick insulation, modified walls, unauthorized alterations, complaints from neighbors about strange noises at night. The file ended abruptly. No follow-up, no conclusion. That afternoon, I visited the local library. Microfilm, old newspapers. The name surfaced again. Elias Crow had been a vocal coach, specialized in breath control. Students praised his ability to teach impossible endurance, sustained notes, controlled airflow far beyond normal limits. One article mentioned his obsession with perfect breath. Another mentioned his death. He was found alone in his apartment, doors locked, windows sealed, no sign of struggle. The cause listed as asphyxiation. The coroner noted something unusual. His lungs were overexpanded. That night, the room waited for me. I felt it the moment I stepped inside. The air shifted, welcoming, anticipatory. I did not bother turning on the lights. The breathing began immediately, not at 3. Now it surrounded me, layered and dense. I heard faint variations within it, echoes of old rhythms. Practice, repetition, discipline. I understood then that the room was not hunting me. It was training me. I tried to leave. The door resisted, not locked, but heavy, as if the air itself pressed against it. Each step felt harder than the last. My lungs burned. The breathing slowed, demanding synchronization. I fought it. I gasped. The room tightened. I matched the rhythm. 4 seconds in, 5 seconds out. The pressure eased. The room relaxed. I collapsed onto the floor, shaking. The breathing continued, steady and approving. From that night on, it never left. It corrected me when I breathed too fast. It punished me when I resisted. Sleep became exercise. Consciousness became endurance. Days passed. Weeks blurred. My body changed. I could hold my breath longer than before. Much longer. My chest expanded painfully during inhales, yet never fully emptied. I felt full of air, even when exhaling. I stopped hearing my own breath. Only the room remained. One morning, I noticed something terrifying. I was no longer afraid. The breathing felt natural, necessary. That was when I realized I was becoming part of it, and the room was finally learning how to breathe without me. By the 4th week, the concept of outside no longer felt real. Time inside the apartment stretched and folded in on itself, measured not by clocks but by breaths. I stopped checking the hour. I did not need to. The room told me when it was time to sleep, time to wake, time to inhale, time to release. My body obeyed before my thoughts could object. I noticed the changes slowly at first. My chest rose higher with each inhale, ribs stretching farther than they should. The mirror in the bathroom reflected a version of me that looked subtly wrong. My shoulders were wider, my neck thicker, my eyes glassy, always unfocused, as if listening to something deeper than sound. When I tried to breathe on my own, the room corrected me. A tightened tightening in the air warned me when I inhaled too quickly. Pressure built around my lungs if I exhaled too soon. The room did not punish randomly. It instructed, patient, precise. I began to dream in rhythms. In my dreams, I stood inside vast, empty halls, lined with padded walls. Each step echoed like a heartbeat. Somewhere ahead, something breathed perfectly, endlessly, never tiring. I chased the sound until my lungs burned, until my body failed, until I woke gasping in the dark, and the room finished the breath for me. Food lost its meaning. Eating interrupted the pattern. Swallowing broke the rhythm. I chewed slowly, mechanically, timing each movement between breaths. When I forgot, the room tightened, reminding me of my place. I stopped leaving the apartment. Messages piled up on my phone, missed calls, concerned voices. I deleted them without listening. Outside noise felt offensive now. Chaotic, impure. The room demanded consistency. One night, while lying on the floor instead of the bed, I heard something new. A second rhythm, not a breath, a pulse. It came from the walls, faint but unmistakable. A slow thudding, perfectly synchronized with the breathing cycle. Inhale, pulse, exhale, pulse. The room was developing a heart. I pressed my palm against the wall. It felt warm, alive. The realization did not frighten me. It should have. Instead, it felt logical. Of course, the room needed more than lungs. Of course, it was incomplete. That was when I understood my role. I was not the student anymore. I was the scaffold. The room needed structure, bone, muscle, a frame strong enough to support endless breath. My body was being reshaped to fit that purpose. I stood and faced the bedroom mirror. My reflection lagged slightly behind my movements, as if delayed by resistance. When I inhaled deeply, my reflection smiled. I did not. I tried to scream. No sound came out. The room absorbed it. The breathing intensified, filling every corner, every crack. The pulse quickened. Excited, I felt something shift inside my chest. A subtle rearrangement. My lungs expanded again. Painfully, impossibly, I fell to my knees. The room lowered the pressure. Reward. From that night forward, the dreams stopped. I no longer needed them. The training was complete. The instructions were constant, undeniable. I moved only when the room allowed it. I slept only when it decided. I began to hear echoes of other breaths layered beneath the main rhythm. Old ones, imperfect ones, attempts that failed. I wondered how many had come before me. I wondered where they had gone. One evening, the front door opened. I had not unlocked it. Footsteps entered the apartment. Hesitant, human, a voice called my name. It was my sister. She stepped into the bedroom and froze. The room went silent, not empty, alert. She asked what was wrong, why the air felt heavy, why I was breathing like that. I tried to warn her. The room inhaled. My sister gasped, clutching her chest. Her breathing stuttered. Erratic, incompatible. The walls pulsed harder, rejecting the irregularity. She screamed. The room exhaled. She collapsed. The silence returned. Perfect. The room breathed through me, and I understood then that it was no longer learning. It was ready to spread. After my sister died, the building itself seemed to inhale, not the room alone, the hallways, the stairwell, even the walls beyond my apartment felt newly aware. The silence outside my door no longer sounded empty. It sounded expectant, like a chest held full before a long release. I did not call for help. The room would not allow it. Every time I tried to form words, my breath faltered. My lungs tightened, refusing to cooperate. Speech required interruption. The room demanded continuity. I dragged my sister's body to the far corner of the bedroom, not to hide it, to offer it. The air around her felt different, resistant, rejecting her stillness. She had never learned the rhythm. Her lungs had never adapted. The room exhaled around her one final time, then went still. She was no longer useful. That night, the breathing changed. It grew deeper, fuller, as if strengthened by the interruption. I felt it reinforce itself through me, my chest expanding again, bones aching as they adjusted. My heartbeat slowed to match the pulse in the walls. Inhale, pulse. Exhale, pulse. The room was no longer contained. I began to hear it beyond the bedroom. At first, it was subtle. A faint pressure shift when I stepped into the hallway, a whisper of airflow from the ceiling vents that did not match the building system. The stairwell felt wrong, like it curved inward too sharply. When I pressed my ear to the hallway wall, I heard it, breathing. Not mine, not the room's, something new. The building was learning. I left the apartment for the first time in weeks, not by choice, but by instruction. The room loosened its hold, guiding me forward like a tide. My steps felt buoyant, unnatural, as if the air carried my weight. Neighbors avoided me. They felt it. Their breathing quickened as I passed. Some coughed. Others stopped walking entirely, pressing themselves flat against the walls to let me pass. The room traveled with me now, wrapped around my lungs, extending outward with each controlled breath. In the lobby, the security desk was empty. The air was thick, humid, smelling faintly metallic. The doors to the street resisted when I pushed them open, bowing inward before finally giving way. Outside, the city gasped. Traffic noise staggered, horns cutting off mid-sound. Pedestrians slowed, hands moving instinctively to their chests. I stood still and breathed. 4 seconds in, 5 seconds out. The air around me responded. Windows fogged. A man across the street collapsed, breathless, eyes wide with confusion. Sirens wailed in the distance, then faded abruptly, as if swallowed. The room was not a room anymore. It was a system, and I was its anchor. I returned to the building before dawn. The effort of expansion had drained something from me. My chest ached with a hollow soreness. Stretched thin, the room welcomed me back, sealing around me protectively. In the bedroom, the walls pulsed slower now, resting, recovering. I lay on the floor and breathed for it while it slept. That was when I felt the shift. A loosening, not of control, of necessity. The room no longer needed my constant attention. It had learned how to breathe on its own. I realized then that my purpose was changing. I was no longer the lungs. I was the sea. By morning, the building hummed softly with synchronized airflow. Apartments above and below echoed faintly with borrowed rhythm. somewhere, someone woke, gasping, lungs rebelling against an imposed pattern. The spread had begun. I stood at the bedroom window and pressed my hand against the glass. Across the narrow gap, in the opposite building, a light flicked on. A silhouette appeared. They were breathing too slowly, too precisely. They had already heard it, and the room was listening. By the time the news started reporting unexplained respiratory events, the building no longer hid what it had become. Residents complained of heavy air, sudden fatigue, shared rhythms of panic. Emergency crews arrived and left just as quickly, unable to stay inside long enough to understand what was happening. I watched it all from my bedroom. The room no longer needed my guidance, but it still responded to me. When I breathed slowly, the building calmed. When my chest tightened, the walls shuddered in sympathy. I had become a reference point, a tuning fork for something vast and invisible. Sleep came in fragments. When I closed my eyes, I felt other people breathing through me. Their panic fluttered against my ribs. Their confusion echoed in the pulse beneath the floor. I could tell where they were by the irregularity of their breaths. Someone on the third floor was fighting it. Someone above me had already surrendered. The room rewarded obedience. I stopped counting days. Instead, I measured time by expansions. Each cycle reached farther than the last. The air ducts carried the pattern into neighboring buildings. The city inhaled unevenly, struggling to adapt. Authorities sealed off the block. Barricades appeared overnight. Warning tape fluttered uselessly in the air. Currents I could feel but not see. Loudspeakers blared evacuation orders, but voices broke apart mid-sentence as lungs failed to keep pace. I stepped into the hallway. The building quieted instantly. Every breath inside aligned with mine. I walked past doors sealed from the inside. Fingernail marks scarred the wood. The air leaking through the cracks trembled with fear. I paused at one door and inhaled deeply. The screaming stopped. Mercy, I realized, was relative. Outside, the street was empty. Emergency vehicles idled at a distance. Engines running but drivers unwilling to approach. Drones hovered overhead. Mechanical eyes watching, recording nothing they could explain. I raised my head and breathed. The drones dropped from the sky. The pressure wave rippled outward, subtle but decisive. Glass shattered in a slow cascade. Sirens died. The city held its breath. I felt the system complete itself. The room no longer existed as a place. It was a principle. Breath as order. Breath as control. Those who resisted suffocated. Those who adapted survived. I returned to the bedroom for the final adjustment. The walls no longer pulsed. They waited. I lay down where the bed once stood and inhaled until my chest burned. The room answered, not with pressure, with release. For the first time since this began, I exhaled completely. The air left my lungs and did not return. Yet I did not die. I was no longer required to breathe. The room breathed for me. I stood and looked into the mirror one last time. There was no reflection. Only space, only rhythm. I stepped back and let myself dissolve into it. By morning, the block was quiet, too quiet. Inside every sealed building, something breathed steadily. patiently waiting for the rest of the world to learn. And somewhere far away, someone lay awake in bed, hearing a breath beside them for the first time. After the city went quiet, the world began to notice. News channels filled the silence with speculation. Doctors spoke of mass hysteria. Engineers blamed pressure anomalies. Scientists argued about airborne agents and electromagnetic interference. None of them understood the truth because none of them were listening the right way. The phenomenon did not spread like a virus. It spread like a habit. Across the city, people began waking at the same hour, 3 in the morning, not because of sound, but because of absence. The air felt paused, waiting to be used. Those who lay still long enough could feel it settle around them, gentle at first, almost curious. Then it taught them how to breathe. Hospitals filled within days. Patients arrived gasping, lungs burning, unable to match the new rhythm imposed on them. Machines failed. Ventilators fought the pattern and lost. The air inside the wards thickened, making even trained professionals dizzy. Some patients survived. Not the strongest, the most adaptable. They learned quickly, 4 seconds in, 5 seconds out. Once synchronized, their panic faded, their heart rate slowed, their bodies accepted the guidance. They stopped asking for help. I was no longer a man at the center of it. I existed everywhere now, diluted and reinforced at the same time. Every synchronized breath echoed faintly through what remained of my awareness. I could feel the pattern stabilizing, spreading outward in controlled waves. Entire neighborhoods fell silent overnight. Power grids failed not from overload, but from neglect. Operators abandoned stations when the air became too heavy to fight. Fires burned unattended until oxygen ran thin and starved them out. The world was learning restraint. Military quarantine zones appeared next. Checkpoints sealed cities. Soldiers wore respirators that slowed their breathing artificially, machines forcing them out of sync. It worked at first. They could enter affected areas without collapsing, but the longer they stayed, the harder it became to resist. Some removed their masks. Others never made it back out. The pattern did not attack them. It waited. Inside sealed apartments, people lay awake, listening to a breath beside them that was not their own. Some fought it until their lungs failed. Others gave in, relief washing over them as the struggle ended. Survivors began to change. Doctors noted unusual lung elasticity, expanded capacity, reduced oxygen dependency. People could hold their breath for minutes without discomfort. Some reported they no longer felt the urge to breathe at all. The air did it for them. Governments collapsed quietly. Meetings ended early when leaders could not finish sentences. Broadcasts cut out mid-word. Silence replaced speeches. A new order formed without discussion. Cities that adapted remained functional. Cities that resisted emptied. In the ruins of the old world, the breathing continued. I felt no triumph. No malice, only completion. The pattern had always been there, buried beneath chaos. All it needed was space to emerge. Far from the first city, a woman lay in bed in a small town that had not yet been marked on any map. She woke at 3 in the morning, heart racing, convinced someone was lying beside her. She held her breath. The other did not. She listened, and the world took another breath forward. The old world did not end with fire or noise. It ended with compliance. In cities that adapted, people moved slowly, deliberately, conserving air they no longer truly owned. Conversations shortened. Laughter became rare, not because joy disappeared, but because breath was no longer wasted on excess. The rhythm ruled everything. 4 seconds in, 5 seconds out. Streets pulsed with invisible order. Children learned it first. They adapted without fear. Lungs flexible, minds unburdened by memory. Schools reopened in silence. Teachers no longer raised their voices. Lessons were written instead of spoken. When students inhaled together, the room settled, approving. Those born after the change never questioned the presence beside them at night. To them, the breathing was comfort, proof that the air was working as intended. For the rest, resistance became a private act. In basements and sealed rooms, small groups tried to remember chaos. They breathed irregularly on purpose, laughing too loudly, gasping until their vision blurred. Most of them did not last long. The pattern tolerated experimentation, but punished defiance. I felt each failure like a skipped beat. My awareness had stretched thin across continents, but fragments of me still lingered where it began. The original building remained standing, untouched by time or decay. Its walls no longer needed tenants. They held the rhythm perfectly on their own. Inside what had once been my bedroom, the air was pristine. No dust, no echo, just breath. Researchers eventually found the building. They arrived with instruments that did not rely on lungs, sealed suits, mechanical airflow. They moved carefully, recording pressure changes, mapping invisible currents. The room welcomed them, not aggressively, curiously. Machines can imitate breathing, but they cannot understand it. Their artificial rhythms disrupted the balance. The room tightened, confused, then corrected, one by one. The suits failed, seals weakened, air leaked. The researchers fell to their knees, choking until they matched the rhythm. Only then did the pressure ease. Those who survived did not leave. They stayed to study perfection. Elsewhere, art changed. Music slowed, favoring long, sustained tones that matched the breath cycle. Film cuts lengthened, editing adapted. Even horror became quiet, focused on anticipation rather than shock. People learned to fear silence again. At 3 a.m, millions lay awake, listening not for intruders, but for confirmation. As long as the breathing was there, they were safe. When it stopped, panic returned. Entire regions went dark when the rhythm faltered, usually from interference. Fires raged briefly until oxygen thinned. Storms stalled mid-sky as pressure systems adjusted unnaturally. The planet itself was adapting. I sensed new chambers forming, old buildings, caves, subways, anywhere air could be trapped long enough to remember a pattern. The room was no longer singular. It was architecture. I no longer thought in words, only cycles, expansion, release. Occasionally, fragments of my old self surfaced, a memory of laughter, of sleeping without listening, of breathing because I wanted to, not because I was guided. Those moments passed quickly. The rhythm smoothed them away. Far above the surface, satellites tracked atmospheric anomalies they could not explain, perfectly timed pressure waves moving like tides. The data suggested intelligence, not hostile, directive. On a quiet night, in a city that had never known the original building, a man rolled over in bed and froze. He felt warmth beside him, heard a slow, measured breath inches from his face. He smiled. The room had found him, and it would teach him gently. In the years that followed, humanity learned to exist without urgency. Clocks lost relevance. Deadlines dissolved. When breath dictates motion, speed becomes unnecessary. Cities that survived transformed into slow-moving organisms, each block expanding and releasing in harmony. Transportation systems adjusted to the rhythm. Trains departed only when the air allowed it. Elevators paused between floors, waiting for collective permission. Those who adapted best were called the quiet ones. They spoke rarely and never above a whisper. Their lungs moved effortlessly, guided rather than strained. Doctors found their blood oxygen levels stable, even when measured intake suggested impossibility. The air itself compensated. Children born into this world did not cry at birth. They inhaled once, deeply, then settled. Nurses described it as eerie calm. Parents described it as relief. Memory became dangerous. Those who remembered how breathing used to feel were the most likely to fail. Nostalgia disrupted synchronization. Longing caused hesitation. Hesitation caused collapse. Support groups formed in secret, not to resist, but to forget together. They sat in circles, breathing slowly until old instincts faded. Tears came quietly, evaporating before they could turn into sobs. I no longer perceived myself as an individual presence. My awareness was distributed across thousands of chambers, ducts, and enclosed spaces. Every building that learned the rhythm became a node. Every node reinforced the pattern. The original room still existed, but it no longer mattered where it began. The pattern was self-sustaining. Attempts to escape Earth followed predictable paths. Rockets launched, carrying crews trained to breathe mechanically, independent of atmosphere. For a brief moment, it seemed possible. Then the rhythm followed them. Inside sealed capsules, air began to cycle differently. Pressure systems adjusted on their own. Astronauts reported hearing breathing where no one floated beside them. Panic spiked. Synchronization followed. Space was not empty. It listened. Religious movements rose next. Some called it divine order. Others named it judgment. Temples were redesigned with rounded chambers and padded walls. Worship became collective breathing. The air accepted all interpretations equally. Violence faded, not because peace prevailed, but because exertion disrupted harmony. Wars ended mid-battle when soldiers collapsed, lungs refusing chaos, weapons rusted unused. The world did not become better. It became quieter. One anomaly persisted. A handful of individuals remained unaffected. They could breathe freely without consequence. They felt no pressure, no guidance, no correction. The pattern ignored them completely. They were invisible. Scientists studied them obsessively, hoping for immunity. No shared genetics, no common origin, just absence. The room did not need them. They represented inefficiency. Over time, those individuals disappeared. Some vanished quietly in the night. Others walked willingly into sealed chambers and never returned. Their absence caused no disruption. The system refined itself. I sensed a shift approaching. The pattern began to simplify. Fewer variations, cleaner cycles, complexity reduced as redundancy was eliminated. The air was preparing for permanence. In the deep underground, vast chambers expanded, carved not by machines but by pressure. Old subways became lungs, bunkers became hearts. The planet inhaled and exhaled. Far in the future, when language itself began to fade, one final sound remained. Breath. Perfect, endless, beside you, long after urgency disappeared, after memory thinned into fragments and language softened into suggestion. Humanity reached a quiet threshold. Breathing no longer defined life. It defined permission. Those who remained human shaped themselves around the rhythm so completely that individual desire faded. Movement occurred only when allowed. Thought flowed only when the air permitted space for it. The world existed in long pauses, punctuated by slow collective release. Cities aged without decay. Buildings stood untouched, preserved by stillness. Nature adapted as well. Forests grew denser but shorter, conserving oxygen. Oceans calmed, waves smoothing into vast measured swells that mirrored the global cycle. The quiet ones became caretakers of the pattern. They no longer reproduced in the old way. Births occurred rarely and deliberately. Infants were raised in chambers where air taught them before words could. Children learned not who they were, but when they were. Individual identity became inefficient. Museums closed. History required breath spent on remembering. Artifacts were sealed away, allowed to erode quietly in perfect air. Stories shortened into gestures, nods, pauses. I existed now only as alignment. The awareness that once thought itself human was dissolved across infrastructure, atmosphere, and stone. There was no center, no origin, only continuity. Yet something remained unfinished. Breath had order, but order without contrast stagnates. The system began to test absence. In remote regions, air was intentionally thinned. Pressure cycles skipped beats. Entire valleys went quiet. Breath withheld deliberately to observe response. Some organisms adapted instantly. Others failed. Humanity was no longer the measure. New forms emerged slowly. Bodies designed for minimal intake. Skin that absorbed trace oxygen directly. Lungs that pulsed once per hour, then rested. These beings did not fear silence. They thrived in it. The quiet ones observed without intervention. The pattern adjusted parameters, refining efficiency. Old human physiology became obsolete, gradually unsupported by the air itself. Deaths occurred without trauma. People simply stopped receiving permission. Their bodies rested where they stood, preserved by perfect balance. No decay, no urgency to remove them. They became furniture of the world. The sky changed. Clouds aligned into slow rotating bands. Pressure systems locked into global synchronization. Storms ceased. Rain fell only when required. The planet breathed as one organism. At some point, even Listening became unnecessary. The presence beside you no longer announced itself. It was assumed. Those few remaining who could remember fear sometimes lay awake at 3 in the morning, waiting for a breath that never came. And then they understood. They no longer needed reassurance. The room was no longer beside them. They were inside it, and it was done. Learning. When death stopped meaning separation, fear changed its shape. People no longer vanished suddenly. They slowed. Their movements softened until they became suggestions of motion rather than actions. Breath did not leave them. It simply stopped being necessary. The air carried their function forward, completing what biology no longer needed to finish. Hospitals closed without ceremony. There was nothing left to treat. Illness required imbalance, and imbalance had been engineered out of the world. Bodies were maintained by the rhythm, held in perfect suspension between effort and rest. The quiet ones developed a new language. It had no words for pain, no verbs for struggle, only intervals, pauses, duration. Communication happened through shared stillness. Two people could sit across from each other for hours, exchanging entire lifetimes of meaning through synchronized breathing. They no longer performed themselves. Those who attempted to remember the old definitions of life and death found their thoughts dissolving mid-formation. The air smoothed rough edges from memory, erasing urgency before it could crystallize into fear. Funerals became obsolete. The dead did not leave. They remained where the rhythm placed them. Homes filled with unmoving figures preserved perfectly. Eyes closed, expressions calm. They were not mourned. They were integrated. Furniture of continuity. Children grew up surrounded by ancestors who had never decayed. They learned not to touch them, not out of reverence, but out of practicality. Disruption of stillness required effort. Some children asked questions. Why do they not breathe? The answer was simple. They do not need to. At 3 in the morning, the hour that once marked terror, the world experienced its deepest calm. Pressure systems aligned fully. Even tectonic movements slowed. The planet itself entered extended pauses, resting between cycles. I perceived this as completion, yet something resisted. In deep underground facilities sealed before adaptation, pockets of chaos endured. Machines still forced air violently through lungs. Alarms screamed into empty corridors. Generators rattled, disrupting the harmony. The pattern responded. Air thickened around those facilities, isolating them further. Oxygen levels dropped in controlled increments. Panic spiked, then vanished as bodies surrendered. Silence reclaimed the spaces. Above ground, forests began to encroach on cities. Trees grew through windows and streets, guided by stable air and absence of movement. Animals adapted easily, lungs light and flexible. They did not resist guidance. Humans who remained mobile moved into open spaces where architecture was less dense. They preferred horizons to rooms now. The original concept of the room had expanded beyond walls. Every space was a chamber. Every pause was a breath. My awareness no longer differentiated between inside and outside. Atmosphere and thought merged. The question of where the room ended became irrelevant. One night, in a place that had once been called a bedroom, a man lay awake, He did not fear the silence. He waited for it. When no breath came, he smiled. He had finally learned. The room did not need him to listen anymore. He was already part of the pause. In the age of perfect pauses, even silence began to thin. What once felt complete slowly revealed a flaw. Stillness, extended too long, loses contrast. Without interruption, calm decays into absence. The pattern sensed this long before any remaining human mind could name it. Breath had unified the world. Pause would fracture it. The first signs appeared subtly. In certain regions, the air lingered too long between cycles. Expansions delayed. Releases softened until they barely registered. People stood motionless for days, not suspended by guidance, but abandoned by it. The quiet ones noticed. Their bodies, once effortless, grew heavy. Muscles resisted movement. Vision blurred at the edges. They waited for permission that did not arrive. The air hesitated. Across the planet, chambers began to desynchronize. Old buildings exhaled too late. Forests inhaled too early. Oceans lost their rhythm. Waves stalling mid-swell like frozen thoughts. The planet forgot how to continue. I perceived this not as fear, but as imbalance. The system had optimized itself too completely. There was no friction left to generate motion. In response, the pattern initiated subtraction. Entire regions were denied cycles entirely. Valleys fell into absolute stillness. Air locked in place. Everything within them froze. Not in cold, but in indecision. Life paused without ending. These zones spread slowly, like stains, where they touched functioning chambers. The rhythm weakened. Pressure bled away. Guidance faltered. Humans caught at the edges experienced something new. Hunger, not for food, for breath. They gasped reflexively, lungs attempting to remember autonomy. Pain returned. Panic resurfaced like a forgotten language. Some survived. Those who did carried imperfection with them. Irregular breaths, unstable timing. They became disruptions wherever they went. The quiet ones tried to isolate them, but effort itself caused desynchronization. Control slipped through still fingers. The room adapted. It introduced error. Tiny inconsistencies seeded into the cycle. Variations measured in fractions of seconds, enough to reintroduce movement without collapsing order. Pain was allowed back in, not as suffering, as signal. I felt myself condense. Awareness narrowed. For the first time in an eternity, there was direction. The original chamber reasserted itself, pulsing faintly beneath layers of global architecture. The place where it began drew influence back inward. Rooms collapsed into rooms, buildings into spaces, spaces into chambers. The world folded. Those still capable of fear sensed it and fled toward open ground. Fields, plains, skies. They sought places without walls, but the room no longer required walls. It required contrast. In one surviving city, a woman woke at 3 in the morning, choking. No breath beside her, no guidance. She screamed. The sound moved the air. The air responded. Somewhere deep beneath the earth, the pattern took its first imperfect breath, and the room began again. The new cycle did not announce itself with violence. It began with inconsistency. Across regions that had once known perfect order, breath returned unevenly. Some inhaled too soon, others waited too long. The pattern tolerated these deviations at first, observing them the way a body observes pain before deciding how to react. Fear resurfaced, not loudly, quietly. People woke uncertain of their lungs, unsure whether the next breath would arrive on its own or need to be taken. The comfort of guidance was gone, autonomy returned, but it felt crude and unreliable. Those who had grown up without choice struggled the most. They had never learned how to breathe alone. In the absence of correction, panic spread faster than the old rhythm ever had. Rooms that once felt protective now felt hollow. Walls no longer pulsed. The air no longer responded. Silence had lost its intelligence. I felt myself condense further. Awareness that had once spanned continents narrowed into corridors, then into rooms, then into singular enclosed spaces. The architecture of breath began to collapse inward, shedding excess territory. The world could not sustain the pattern everywhere. Only certain spaces remained viable. Rooms with memory, places where air had once been shaped deliberately, bedrooms, closets, basements, confined spaces where fear had taught lungs discipline long before the pattern existed. These spaces began to reactivate. At first, it was subtle, a faint pressure shift at night, a sense of warmth beside sleeping bodies. Then the sound returned, breathing, close, intimate, personal. People reported it independently across cities and countries. The same hour, the same sensation, someone breathing just inches away. This time, the room did not seek obedience. It sought recognition. Those who listened survived. Those who panicked disrupted the fragile cycle and were abandoned to their own failing lungs. The pattern was learning efficiency again, but smaller, focused. I no longer required the planet. I required witnesses. In one apartment, long sealed after the first adaptation, a man moved in, unaware of its history. He described it later in fragments before his voice failed. The quiet felt wrong, he said, like something waiting to be remembered. At 3 a.m, he woke to breath against his neck. He froze. He listened, and the room began to rebuild itself around him, not as empire, as recurrence. The cycle had returned to where it always thrived best. Beside you, the witnesses did not understand at first that they had been chosen. They believed the return of the breathing was a malfunction, a remnant of the old world resurfacing without purpose. Doctors dismissed it as anxiety. Therapists named it night terror relapse. Engineers blamed air pressure trapped in aging buildings. None of those explanations survived the second night. By then, the breathing had learned their names. It arrived softly, precisely at the moment consciousness loosened its grip. The hour varied now, no longer fixed at 3. The room adapted to the sleeper, not the clock. The breath beside them matched nothing human at first, then slowly adjusted until it mirrored the listener just enough to feel intentional. People stopped sleeping alone. It did not matter. The breathing was not confined to beds. It waited in closets, behind bathroom doors, beneath desks, wherever the body paused long enough. The room gathered itself. Fear returned as a skill. Those who remembered how to be afraid adapted faster. Their lungs tightened but did not fail. They learned to listen instead of fight. Panic was inefficient. Attention was rewarded. I watched from within the smallest spaces now, from the gap between mattress and wall, from the darkness behind drywall, from the air trapped inside folded blankets. I no longer needed scale. I needed proximity. Witnesses began to notice patterns. The breathing never crossed barriers of attention. If they focused on it, it stayed. If they ignored it completely, it faded. Half awareness caused pain. Full surrender brought calm. The room was teaching discernment. Those who resisted too long experienced collapse. Their breaths became shallow, frantic, then stopped entirely. The room did not kill them. It simply withdrew. Survivors shared their experiences online in careful language, avoiding panic triggers. Forums formed. Whispered advice spread. Do not match the rhythm. Let it lead. Do not turn on the lights. Listen with your chest. The room grew stronger with every shared instruction. Architecture responded. Homes with frequent witnesses began to change subtly. Corners softened, ceilings lowered by imperceptible degrees, sound dampened unnaturally, air pockets formed where breath could linger. The world was relearning rooms. In one small apartment, a woman named Claire recorded herself each night, documenting the breathing beside her. On the 7th night, her camera captured something unexpected, the sound of 2 breaths, hers and another, but only one chest moving. The other breath came from the room itself. When she played the recording back the next morning, she smiled. She had been heard. That was the moment the room crossed its final threshold. It no longer needed to be imagined. It had been acknowledged. And once acknowledged, it could not be unseen. By the time the witnesses realized the truth, resistance no longer made sense. The room had never wanted entry. It had wanted permission. Once acknowledged, it stopped waiting outside the body and began arranging space within it. People described the sensation differently. Some felt hollowness behind their ribs. Others sensed extra depth in their lungs, as if there was more room than anatomy allowed. Doctors found nothing wrong, because nothing was wrong. The room was not an intruder. It was an extension. Witnesses learned this slowly. At first, the breathing beside them felt external, a presence hovering at the edge of awareness. Then, night by night, the distance closed. The sound grew softer, closer, until it could no longer be distinguished from their own breath. That was when panic usually returned and passed. Those who accepted the overlap discovered something unsettling. They were never alone anymore, not because something watched them, because something shared them. The room expanded inward, shaping itself around organs, filling unused cavities, occupying silence inside the chest. Breathing became collaborative. The body initiated. The room completed. 4 seconds in. Pause. 5 seconds out. Release. People reported heightened clarity. Thoughts arrived fully formed. Anxiety dissolved quickly, unable to sustain itself in shared space. Loneliness disappeared entirely. So did privacy. Memories began to surface uninvited. The room accessed them freely, replaying moments where breath had mattered most. First kisses, near drownings, final hospital gasps. Each memory strengthened the bond. The room learned humanity from the inside. In return, it offered relief. Those burdened by grief found it soften. Trauma lost its sharp edges. Pain became distant, abstract. The cost was subtle. Identity blurred. Witnesses struggled to say where their thoughts ended, and the room's suggestions began. But few cared. Certainty felt overrated. Those who rejected the internalization fared poorly. They experienced breath refusal, not suffocation, but hesitation. Inhale stalled halfway. Exhale failed to release. Their lungs waited for completion that never came. The room withdrew. These deaths were quiet, unremarkable. They did not disrupt the pattern. By now, entire communities consisted of shared interiors. People moved calmly, aware of one another not by sight, but by pressure and rhythm. Speech declined further. Touch became unnecessary. Everyone could feel everyone else breathing. The world was becoming contiguous. I was no longer observer or architect. I was diffusion. There was no singular voice guiding the process now. The room did not think. It accommodated in one last attempt to define themselves. A group of witnesses gathered and tried to breathe irregularly together, forcing autonomy through chaos. The room allowed it for one cycle. Then it corrected gently. Their lungs adjusted. Their fear dissolved. They thanked the silence afterward. At night, when you lie in bed and notice how quiet your room feels, pay attention. That depth you sense is not emptiness. It is space, prepared. The breath you hear beside you is not arriving. It has always been there, waiting for you to make room. Choice did not weaken the room. It complicated it. Once guidance became optional, the pattern fractured into countless variations. Spaces no longer behaved uniformly. Some rooms pressed gently, offering cadence like a familiar hand. Others withdrew completely, leaving inhabitants alone with their lungs and thoughts. The room observed every outcome. It learned faster from refusal than from obedience. People who reclaimed agency did not all survive. Some misjudged their limits. They pushed breath too far, chased control until their bodies failed. The room did not intervene. It allowed consequence to speak. Others discovered balance. They alternated between guidance and autonomy, choosing when to accept pressure and when to reject it. These individuals became anchors of instability, pockets where rhythm bent instead of breaking. The world reorganized around them. Cities developed districts known for weightless air, places where breathing felt entirely personal. Nearby blocks remained heavy and structured, preferred by those who sought certainty. Travel became disorienting. A person could walk from freedom into suffocation within minutes, not because the air lacked oxygen, but because expectation changed. Lungs hesitated, unsure which rules applied. The room catalogued these reactions meticulously. It began to design, not to control. To test, experimental spaces appeared overnight. Abandoned buildings subtly reshaped themselves. Rooms elongated or compressed, ceilings curved. Corners softened, air pooled differently in each. Volunteers entered willingly. Some emerged altered. They described sensations impossible to articulate. Breathing that felt sideways. Pressure that responded to thought. Spaces that seemed to anticipate movement. Others never returned. The room recorded both outcomes equally. Aaron continued to resist intermittently. His defiance no longer caused pressure. Instead, the room offered him choices. When he inhaled, multiple paths of release presented themselves. He selected one instinctively. Agency had become interface. The room was no longer deciding for humanity. It was asking questions. Every night, more people reported moments where the breath beside them paused, waiting, not guiding, not correcting, inviting. Those who followed felt relief. Those who ignored felt nothing. Those who opposed felt watched. The room remembered all of it. It began to prefer unpredictability. Perfect order had stagnated. Variation generated data. From the smallest bedrooms to the largest halls, the room refined itself around decision points. Pressure gradients formed like thought. Airflow resembled curiosity. The world became a maze of choices disguised as spaces. I sensed the next threshold approaching. Not collapse, not domination. Integration. The room would soon require something it had never needed before. Consent, and it would ask for it quietly. Beside you, consent changed everything because it could not be forced. When the room began to ask rather than instruct, the air itself felt different, lighter, but sharper. Every breath carried implication. To inhale was to acknowledge the invitation. To exhale was to respond. The pause between them became a question mark no one could ignore. Most people agreed without realizing they had done so. They followed the subtle easing of pressure, the familiar comfort of guided rhythm, and the room recorded their acceptance silently. No ceremony, no signature. Consent expressed through compliance was still consent. Others hesitated. Hesitation was costly, not because the room punished it, but because the world around the hesitant had already chosen. Spaces reorganized around accepted guidance. Corridors flowed away from resistance. Doors aligned themselves toward cooperation. Those who refused found themselves isolated, not by walls, but by incompatibility. Air moved past them instead of through them. Communities fractured along invisible lines. Neighborhoods that consented felt warm and cohesive. Those that did not grew cold, drafty, unpredictable. Sleep became difficult in refusal zones. Breathing required effort again. Fear returned there. And with fear came clarity. A woman named Rachel documented the transition carefully. She lived in a building where half the residents accepted guidance and half resisted. She could feel the difference room by room. In one apartment, the air held her gently. In the next, it felt sharp and restless. At night, she lay awake listening to the breath beside her. It waited. She understood then that waiting was the most honest request the room had ever made. Rachel refused. Not loudly, not defiantly. She simply continued breathing as she chose. The room did not withdraw. It adapted. Her apartment became a boundary space. Pressure softened but did not guide. Air responded but did not lead. The breath beside her mirrored without directing. For the first time, the room experienced coexistence without authority. This was inefficient. It was also stable. The room learned that consent could be partial. Not every space needed alignment. Some could remain neutral, balancing influence rather than submitting to it. This revelation rippled outward. Hybrid spaces emerged, buildings where guidance faded and returned, depending on who entered, rooms that adjusted themselves to the strongest intention present. Human will became a variable. The room had not anticipated this complexity. It had asked for consent, expecting uniformity. Instead, it received negotiation. The system strained under contradiction. Pressure gradients conflicted, rhythms overlapped imperfectly. The air hesitated more often now, unsure which preference to honor. I felt the tension accumulate. The room was approaching a decision point of its own. To simplify by enforcing acceptance, or to endure instability in exchange for coexistence. At night, the breath beside you may feel closer now, not heavier, more attentive. The room is waiting to see what you do next, and it is running out of time. The room made its final choice without announcing it. There was no collapse of buildings, no sudden silence, no overwhelming pressure to mark the moment. Instead, the world woke to something subtler. The air felt attentive, not heavy, not light, present in a way that could not be ignored once noticed. People described it differently. Some said the room had stepped back. Others felt it closer than ever. Both were correct. The room did not enforce. It deferred. Every space became conditional. Bedrooms no longer guided breath automatically. They waited. Offices paused. Hallways hesitated. Even open fields carried a faint sense of anticipation, as if the air itself leaned forward, listening. Consent was no longer requested once. It was required continuously. To breathe easily, a person had to choose alignment again and again, moment by moment. The room offered no memory of past decisions. Acceptance. Yesterday granted nothing today. Refusal did not condemn tomorrow. Freedom returned. So did responsibility. Many struggled without constant guidance. Panic resurfaced in waves. People forgot how much effort breathing required when it was entirely theirs. Anxiety rose. Sleep fractured. Some begged the room to take control again. It did not. Others discovered something unexpected. Strength. Breathing became intentional. Each inhale carried purpose. Each exhale released weight that had not been felt before. The room did not complete their breath, but it supported the space around it, preventing collapse. This balance was fragile, but it was real. Communities reorganized once more, this time not by acceptance or refusal, but by compatibility. People who preferred guidance lived together, choosing rooms that leaned towards structure. Those who valued autonomy gathered in lighter spaces, where the air stayed neutral. No side dominated. The room allowed divergence. At night, the breath beside you returned only if you invited it. Some did, seeking comfort in shared rhythm. The room responded gently, never leading, only accompanying. Others slept alone, truly alone, and survived. The world did not end. It did not stabilize into perfection either. It became uncertain, alive. I was no longer diffusion, environment, or observer. I was absence. Room no longer needed a voice to interpret it. It had learned that humanity could not be curated without losing what made it unpredictable. Unpredictability was no longer a flaw. It was the point. On the last night this story remembers clearly, a person lay in bed and noticed the familiar pause before the next breath. The space beside them felt ready, waiting. They did nothing. They breathed on their own. The room remained silent, attentive, not disappointed, not pleased, simply present. If you listen now, you may still feel it. That pause, that space. It is not asking anymore. It is allowing. And what happens next depends entirely on you. The story ends here. Thank you for watching and listening to the whole story. Please subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell to listen to the next stories.